Welcome to a very special episode of Laying Down the Law. This is a crossover episode with my friend, M. Persico. They have a podcast called Artists with M, and they are gender non-conforming, non-binary. They invited me to be on their podcast, and I said, well, why don't you be on mine? So M was kind enough to allow me to share their podcast stream with mine. I wanted to release this episode on a day that would be significant and important to raise awareness. And so we're releasing this podcast episode on May 17th. May 17th is the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia, which was created in 2004 to draw attention to violence and discrimination experienced by lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex people, and all other people with diverse sexual orientations, gender identities or expressions, and sex characteristics. The reason May 17th was chosen was because that is the day the World Health Organization decided in 1990 to declassify homosexuality as a mental disorder. So this day is a major global annual landmark to draw attention of decision makers, the media, the public, corporations, opinion leaders, local authorities, etc., to the hostility and the difficulties faced by people who have diverse sexual orientations, gender identities or expressions, and sex characteristics. So I am very honored that M was willing to share their experience on my podcast. If you listen, you'll hear that I at times feel uncomfortable or I say things that are a little awkward. And one of the things that we can do if we're not someone who identifies in a diverse way around gender or sexuality is be welcoming. And M was very gracious in sharing their experience with me and educating me. So please, this is an interesting listen. I can't promise any improv or a lot of comedy in this one, but I think you'll get a great experience and a little bit about the law. Thanks very much and enjoy.
Beyond Unreasonable Doubt and Verboten Productions proudly present Laying Down the Law with your host, Billy DeClercq. That's me.
Welcome to Laying Down the law and comedy podcast that's a real green Jell-O salad. We take nutty improv comedy, we mix it with the lactose-heavy cream cheese of real legal cases and the lighter whipped cream of my opinions on the law, and then we set it in the lime Jell-O of real human connection. The goal is to make a real feast for your ears, or for your Thanksgiving table, that will leave you indisposed for weeks. Today's a very special episode, and before we begin today's legal thrill ride, I'd like to introduce you to my guest. They are a clown, podcaster and musician, singer-songwriter, an indie folk performer in Los Angeles, California. They have a degree in cinema from San Francisco State, and we met in musical improv at the Second City in Hollywood. They recently featured my spouse, Dr. Nicole Tatro, author of Insight into a Bright Mind, on their podcasts, Artists with M. They are M. Persico.
Yay.
Welcome, M.
Hello.
You didn't know about my corny movie trailer intro.
Oh my gosh, it was very exciting. I
That's
could hardly
very fun.
contain myself.
Yeah,
Oh
they
my
don't do that
gosh.
so much anymore, but I think it's a shame.
I like
just-
it.
I
It is
love
a
it.
shame.
It
In a
is-
world.
In a world.
Here, you do it now.
In a world.
It's like my speaking voice is way higher than the in a world, So then just
Yeah,
struggle.
so maybe we have to change people's expectations. We can
in
say,
a world.
oh, that sounds good.
In a world.
One podcaster. One
Another podcaster.
Cool. Well, I'm going to jump right into it. This week, we're not doing improv this week. We're going to just focus on the law because these are really two great cases that I want to get into with you. When you had me on your podcast and we recorded last time, I said and ah and fumbled around for a while. So I'm fresher. I'm
It's
more
okay.
caffeinated, and hopefully I can do a better
Yay.
job this time. Okay. So the first case I want to talk about today, when I asked you, what are you interested in? You said, I'm interested in marital equality. And so the key case in that area is a Supreme Court case from 2015, Obergefell versus Hodges. And in Obergefell v. Hodges, the United States Supreme Court was asked to decide whether the United States Constitution creates a right to marry whomever you choose.
Right.
There were groups of same-sex couples who sued their state agencies, the appropriate state agencies in the states of Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, and Tennessee, to challenge the constitutionality of the state's bans on same-sex marriage or a refusal to recognize same-sex marriages that had occurred in other states that allowed such marriages. So, for example, in California, same-sex marriage has been legal for kind of a while. There was a whole battle over Proposition 8 in the state courts, and ultimately the law changed, the Constitution changed, then it changed back. And so the plaintiffs argued that the statutes, which essentially all said the same thing. The language that was used is, we say that marriage is between one man and one woman. And that was the language that they used in order to discriminate based on gender or gender identity or sex. And I understand that those are different things, different concepts. But the law treats gender and sex in an interesting way. So the plaintiffs argued those statutes violated the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause of the United States Constitution's 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment was enacted just after the Civil War. Most of the constitutional law that has expanded civil rights has looked at the 14th Amendment because the 14th Amendment says that there shall be no law which treats different people differently. That's equal protection. All people are entitled to equal protection under the law. And the Due Process Clause says that all people are entitled to due process or a fair process under the law. And so those are two different clauses that people who want to expand individual rights, individual liberty, freedom, look to as a basis for saying this particular law treats people differently. It discriminates. So if it discriminates, it's treating two groups of people differently. And then there was also claims brought under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In all of the cases, the trial court found in their favor. The Court of Appeal reversed and said that the bans on same-sex marriage and the refusal to recognize these marriages did not violate the couple's 14th Amendment rights to equal protection and due process. And so there are two questions presented by the case. The first question is, does the United States Constitution require every state to license a marriage? Again, we're not talking about religious marriage that could be performed by a minister, but the legal document marriage. And I think it's really important that people distinguish those two ideas in their mind. It's really not a religious case. It's a case about the legal rights that go along with marriage between two people of the same sex. So can a state create a law that says we are going to say that we're only going to give marriage licenses when one person is a man and the other person is a woman, or one person is a woman and the other person is a man? The second question is, because the states were at that time had different laws. So some states it was legal for people of the same sex to be married, and in other states it was not legal. When you move from one state to another, there's a question as to whether your marriage that was legal in one state, say California, would be legal in the state you moved to, say Ohio. Does the 14th Amendment require a state to recognize marriage between those two people when it was legally licensed in one state and not in the other? So under US law, we have sort of different layers of laws. You have the federal law and you have each state having different laws. And so there are issues with conflicts of law, and those typically go to the United States courts to figure out. And so this was a very big win for people who support LGBTQ plus rights, because it was a surprise ruling. In that it was a 5-4 decision, and Justice Anthony Kennedy, who at that time was the swing vote on the court, he wrote the opinion of the court, and he ruled in the favor of the plaintiffs. Now, I want to read a part of this opinion because I just thought it was beautifully written, and I am getting away from reading whole court opinions, but I think this one is really beautiful. But before I do anything, I've been talking for a while. Did you have thoughts about what I was telling you, or questions about what I went over so far? I saw you were taking notes, Em.
Yes. You had two questions. One of them, I got the full question out. Like, will the states recognize the marriage if the person moved from the other state? What was the other question you had? Does the U.S. Constitution require each state something?
Right. So if one of the states makes a law that says, or writes in their constitution, their state constitution, that a marriage is between one man and one woman, is that allowed? So can you have a law? And what the Supreme Court does is it will strike down a law if it's unconstitutional. The Supreme Court of the supreme law of the land being the United States Constitution. So if something violates the U.S. Constitution, the state law is invalidated. So it's like it's never been written, and it's not allowed to be enforced. It's taken off the books. And so these states had laws at that time that said you cannot issue a marriage license to two people of the same sex. And so that was the question: is a law that says that legal? And so the answer to both questions is no, it's not legal to restrict people's right to marry based upon sex. And no, it's not legal to restrict the recognition of marriages that happened elsewhere. So if you're married in California or Massachusetts and you move to Kentucky, your marriage is as valid in Kentucky as it is in California or Massachusetts.
Cool.
Okay. But now everywhere in the United States, if you go to get married and you ask for a license to be married, they are not to ask you your sex.
Mm-hmm.
It's not relevant to getting a marriage license. Yeah. Yeah. Question, comments, thoughts?
It just makes me think like that's exciting to hear. If I ever officially changed my gender marker to X, to non-binary, on my legal documents, that they won't be able to ask me if I ever wanted to marry someone, like, oh, well, what's your gender if you're trying to marry this person or that person? It's like, oh, okay, it doesn't matter.
Right. It's they can't discriminate on that basis.
That's cool, because there's lots of things people can discriminate on, and it's nice that that's not going to be a problem. That's not going to be one of them.
Right. And if it is, then you're going to need to call a lawyer.
And call your friend Billy.
We'll take him to court.
And find their friends of lawyer friends.
We'll take him to court.
Cool.
The second case that we're going to talk about has to do with transgender persons' rights and employment. And in 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, the United States Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision, which was actually written by a conservative Justice Gorsuch, that case held that employers cannot discriminate against trans people.
Ooh. Is that in the whole United States or
the whole United States? So the 1964 Civil Rights Act protects gay, lesbian, and transgender employees from discrimination based on sex. Kind of a surprise case as well, because Gorsuch is not a liberal justice. He's very conservative. He was appointed by the previous president, and it was joined by Roberts, who was appointed by Bush, and then 4 liberal justices. So it's actually a pretty important majority case. And the fact that it's a 6-3 vote suggests that even though the court's makeup has shifted a little bit to the right, with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, bless her, having passed, and with the new justice, whose name won't be mentioned, even though that shifts the makeup a little bit, it doesn't shift it enough that they would go back and reverse this. Also, the court tends to respect prior decisions. They don't reverse themselves very often. Once they've said something on a topic, that the idea is stare decisis, which means the decision stands.
Right. That can be good or bad depending on what they decide.
Yes. And the Supreme Court has changed its holding on some things. currently the conservatives have their eyes on Roe versus Wade with the current makeup of the court to try and erode or reverse that holding. So it can be eroded over time. As constitutional law jurisprudence works is, there can be little changes to the law, but the central ruling of the case would stay the same.
I know Roe versus Wade is like a big one that everyone should know, but it escapes me at the moment. Which one was that?
Okay, Roe versus Wade says that the United States Constitution contains a right to a liberty right to privacy, to individual liberty, control over your own body. It's not explicitly in the Constitution, which is the basis on which conservatives attach it.
Oh, so this is the one related to birth control?
To abortion, yes, a woman's right to choose. And what the central holding in Roe versus Wade is that there cannot be a law that places an undue burden on a woman's right to choose.
Or person, because some people can have babies with uteruses that don't identify as women now.
That is a fantastic point. Thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that.
Because I am non-binary, but I don't identify as a woman, but I have the same.
Absolutely. And I think it's kind of an interesting area to think about how the law might try to catch up in that sense, because the treatment of sex and gender as it's evolving kind of and as understandings are changing and evolving, the laws, and you'll see this in the Gorsuch opinion that I will visit in a second, but the law's treatment of sex as opposed to gender is kind of interesting. So it's a little different, and I think that's a question that it'd be interesting to see how the court would handle that question if someone was a trans person that was physically able to carry a child. How would
really? It's just language. It's all about like what language you use. And some people are saying or might think, oh, you're just being like a sensitive snowflake for wanting the language to be like accepting or accurate according to our like how we like to be referred as. But if language is what protects you, that's all we really have, right?
Well, yeah, and law is just really words.
Yeah.
It is just language. So it can be language that has a big effect on people, but it never stops being amazing to me that the power of the law is in words. With that, I want to read this just really interesting writing. And just so you know, typically the Supreme Court justices, they write their opinions, but they're often written by their staff. They have what are called law clerks, and they do a lot of the writing. So the person who wrote this clearly is a very gifted writer. It says, from the beginning to their most recent page, the annals of human history reveal the transcendent importance of marriage. The lifelong union of a man and a woman has always promised nobility and dignity to all persons, without regard to their station in life. Marriage is sacred to those who live by their religions and offers unique fulfillment to those who find meaning in the secular realm. Its dynamic allows two people to find a life that could not be found alone, for a marriage becomes greater than just two persons. Rising from the most basic human needs, marriage is essential to our most profound hopes and aspirations. The centrality of marriage to the human condition makes it unsurprising that the institution has existed for millennia and across civilizations. Since the dawn of history, marriage has transformed strangers into relatives, binding families and societies together. Confucius taught that marriage lies at the foundation of government. The wisdom was echoed centuries later and a half a world away by Cicero, who wrote, "The first bond of society is marriage, next children, and then the family." There are untold references to the beauty of marriage in religious and philosophical texts, spanning time, cultures, and faiths, as well as in art and literature in all their forms. It is fair and necessary to say that these references were based on the understanding that marriage is a union between two persons of the opposite sex. That history is the beginning of these cases. The respondents say it should be the end as well. To them, these are the respondents are the people who are opposing the changes in the law. These are the people that want marriage to be between one man and one woman. So they say, I think the justice here is going out of his way to be respectful to both sides' opinions and views and deeply held belief, because it is very religious and sacred to some people. And of course, the law protects religion in some ways, but it also, the free exercise of religion, which is protected by the First Amendment, it has to interplay with the equal protection of the law in the 14th Amendment. So those different ideas are in tension, and they're kind of rubbing up against each other here. To the respondents, the people who oppose marriage equality, it would demean a timeless institution if the concept and lawful status of marriage were extended to two persons of the same sex. Marriage, in their opinion, is by its nature a gender differentiated union of man and woman. This view has long been held and continues to be held in good faith by reasonable and sincere people here and throughout the world. The petitioners, these are the plaintiffs, the people who are challenging the law, acknowledge this history, but they contend that these cases cannot end there. Were their intent to demean the Revere idea and reality of marriage, the petitioner claims would be of a different order. That would be a different thing, right? But that is neither the purpose nor their submission. To the contrary, it is the enduring importance of marriage. This kind of makes me emotional, actually. It is the enduring importance of marriage that underlies the petitioner's contentions. This, they say, is their whole point. Far from seeking to devalue marriage, the petitioners seek it for themselves because of their respect and need for its privileges and responsibilities. And their immutable nature dictates that same-sex marriage is their only real path to this profound commitment. I love this beautiful language that talks about the beauty of marriage between people who are of the same sex, who love each other, who want to be a part of it. And it's just that it's a love and respect for marriage. And it's not animosity to marriage. It's more, I want to participate in this. And I don't want to be excluded from this beautiful thing. It really affects me.
Me too. I like it.
So this story, I think it's interesting to find out who the people are that are involved. So James Obergefell, a plaintiff in the Ohio case, met John Arthur over 2 decades ago. They fell in love and started a life together, establishing a lasting, committing relationship. In 2011, Arthur was diagnosed with ALS. ALS is progressive and there's no cure. So 2 years ago, Obergefell and Arthur decided to commit to one another, resolving to marry before Arthur died. To fulfill this promise, they went from Ohio to Maryland, where same-sex marriage was legal. It was very difficult for Arthur to move, so they were wed inside of a medical transport plane as it remained on the tarmac in Baltimore. And 3 months later, Arthur died. Ohio law does not permit Obergefell to be listed as the surviving spouse on Arthur's death certificate. So by law, they're strangers even in death, a state-imposed separation that Obergefell deems hurtful for the rest of time. He brought suit because he wanted to be named as a surviving spouse on Arthur's death certificate. April DeBear and Jane Rouse are co-plaintiffs in a case from Michigan. They celebrated a commitment ceremony to honor their permanent relation in 2007. They're both nurses, DeBear in a neonatal unit and Rouse in an emergency unit. In 2009, DeBear and Rouse fostered and adopted a baby boy. Later that same year, they welcomed another son to their family. The new baby was premature and was abandoned by his biological mother, who required around-the-clock care. The next year, a third child, a baby girl with special needs, joined their family. Michigan only allows opposite-sex married couples or single people to adopt, so each child can only have one woman as his or her legal parent. If an emergency were to, I guess it should say his, her, or their legal parent, but
Woohoo. Nice.
But yeah, if an emergency were to arise, schools and hospitals may treat the 3 children as if they had only one parent. And if a tragedy were to fall, either April or Jane, The other would have no legal rights over the children that she had not been permitted to adopt. So they asked the court to relieve them from this legal uncertainty. Army Reserve Sergeant First Class Ijpe DeClercq and his partner Thomas Kostura, plaintiffs in the Tennessee case, fell in love. In 2011, DeClercq received orders to deploy to Afghanistan. Before leaving, he and Kostura married in New York. A week later, DeClercq began his deployment, which lasted almost a year. When he returned, they settled in Tennessee, where DeClercq works full-time for the Army Reserve. Their lawful marriage is stripped from them whenever they reside in Tennessee, returning and disappearing as they travel across state lines. DeClercq, who served this nation to preserve the freedom of the Constitution protects, must endure a substantial burden. The cases now before the court involve other petitioners as well, each with their own experiences. Their stories reveal that they seek not to denigrate marriage, but rather to live their lives or honor their spouse's memory joined by its bond. I came across that preparing, and I just wanted to read that to you because I thought it was such a beautiful personalization of how the law really affects people. And
yeah, seriously.
I mean, it's these are real people with real lives. And, and I love the real respect for history and tradition and saying, okay, that's history and tradition, but that can evolve over time.
Yeah. So just like how people who practice getting people's pronouns correct, it affects the other person whose pronouns you're trying to get correct every day. Every time I hear someone not try, it's like I hear the wrong pronoun. So just like how that affects me every day. If all these people, if they were in the hospital and their spouse was not recognized as their legal spouse because of the state, it's going to affect how they could do anything in the hospital, or so many silly examples where it's already hard enough to be going through tough decisions when you're in tough situations like hospitals or anywhere where legal stuff is important.
Absolutely. It affects pension rights. It affects people's retirement. It affects their livelihood. It affects their tax status. It affects visitation. Hospital visitation is a big one because a spouse can have the right to visit someone in the hospital, but someone who is a friend or acquaintance may not have that right unless they've documented it in advance. And they're, before this happened, there could be complicated kind of documentation you'd have to do if you wanted to give someone power of attorney, your effectively spouse. I think a lot of the confusion and the difficulty for people who have real trouble with this, what I believe is that I think they're afraid of things they don't understand or people they don't know. And I also think that when you're talking about marriage, I think people are confusing their particular religious experience, which people are free to practice religion, with a legal experience, a legal rights.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if people can understand that basic thing, that even people who might have a hard time understanding marriage equality could at least understand, if two people love each other, shouldn't they be allowed to visit each other in the hospital? If two people have been together, they're for 20 or 30 years, shouldn't one person stand to inherit from the other? And those kinds of things that I think they can maybe understand, but it's difficult because some people just are really afraid of things they don't understand.
A lot of people who don't want to go the extra mile for someone they don't understand, they're not trying to relate to them or be in their shoes or really think about how their vote or anything that they do relates to other people. And I think it's really something that the whole world needs to work on continuously. Like I definitely do. When I was growing up, I was not the most self-aware, or I had to learn how to be empathetic. And so we all have to work on understanding, like where people are coming from and trying to see it in the other people's shoes who don't have like these legal rights for things or who haven't had them in the past.
I fully agree with you, and I really believe that the more people can try to see things from other people's perspective, try to understand how someone else might experience the world, I really think that is what we need the most in our society, is that willingness to walk a mile in someone else's shoes, as the old saying goes. The basic ruling in Obergefell was that the 14th Amendment protects fundamental liberties, regardless of who you're married to. So the right to marry is a fundamental liberty because it involves your individual autonomy. It protects this very intimate association between two people, and the Constitution protects your freedom of association. That's the First Amendment. It safeguards children and families by giving legal recognition to a home and to families. And those are all parts of what the Constitution is designed to affect as keystone of social order. And what Justice Kennedy said is there's no difference between a same-sex union and a different sex union with all these principles. And so excluding same-sex people from marriage violates the due process clause, the right to due process under the law. And because you're treating different people differently, that denies them equal protection under the law. And so these same principles of liberty and equality apply in both cases. The court also held that the First Amendment protects the rights of religious organizations to have their own principles and to hear what they would like to do. But the legal right of marriage is a different right. So you're not impacting someone's freedom of religion. So when I married my spouse, Nicole, we were married in a Catholic church. We had all our family there. We had a priest. The priest gave a homily. He told us what we had to do. We said our vows. After that was all over, we went in a different room and we filled out paperwork. Right? We had to fill out a marriage certificate, a marriage license, and our my best man and her maid of honor signed as witnesses that yes, we were married. That legal document's the one that matters for the government's purposes. Whatever happened in the church, that's the church. That's a separate thing. And that's what the Supreme Court says here is that when you are talking about a legal right that we're protecting under the law, we're not impinging on your church's recognition. And if your church isn't going to do that, we're not talking about that right now. So that's the case. I don't know if you remember, but after the decision was announced, the White House projected a rainbow flag onto it. It's a beautiful image.
Which decision? For Prop 8?
For Obergefell, for this decision.
Really?
Yeah.
And that was in 2015.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's Obergefell.
Dang. It's crazy that these things all have really only happened within the last decade.
Yeah. It is kind of amazing. And I was just thinking about this as I was getting ready to have you on today. And I thought to myself, I remember, because I was born in 1974. I remember when AIDS, the AIDS epidemic happened in the 80s. I was a very different time, and I know you're younger than I am, so you don't remember, but it was a big deal because Rock Hudson, nobody knew he was gay, and he came out and he said, "Yeah, I have AIDS," and that was, I think that as people learn more about real people, I think it changes their opinions. And so a lot has changed about opinions. A lot has changed in the law. And in fact, the day we're releasing this, May 17th, is a recognition of the United Nations changing legal status of people. And that happened in 1990. That's not that long ago.
No.
So we've made significant progress in a short amount of time, but there's a long way to go. The other case I wanted to share with you, I think that might be relevant to you, and really, I think this is important to a lot of people who are transgender to know about these rights, because you're entitled to a discrimination-free workplace. You are entitled to a workplace where you're treated the same as everyone else. And that may or may not actually happen all the time, but it's important to know this legal right. This case came out June 15th, 2020, so last year.
Wow.
And the case is Bostock versus Clayton County. The holding in Bostock is that discrimination against a transgender person is discrimination based on sex. And so we're talking about gender and sex. And so when the way the laws describes it is looking at the Civil Rights Act of 1964 doesn't contain a reference to the word gender. It contains a reference to the word sex. And so the argument of the for folks who opposed the transgender rights in the workplace said, well, the law doesn't say gender. So we're not discriminating based on sex. We're discriminating based on gender, which is that we're saying we have the right to refer to you by your birth gender, and not by your birth sex. Sorry.
Gross.
Yeah. And so what Gorsuch said is, no, that's wrong, actually, because gender and sex are different things. And so if you are denying someone's right to identify as a different gender, you are discriminating based on sex, because you are saying, I'm not going to refer to you as a woman, as female, or as a woman, because your birth gender is male. And so but you wouldn't say that to a person whose birth gender was female. Does that make sense?
Right. Someone who identifies as female.
Someone who's born as a woman and who identifies as a woman, you refer to that person as a woman, is what he's saying. Someone who's born as a man, but identifies as a woman, if you say, I'm not going to treat you as a woman, you are discriminating based on that person's sex, their physical, biological sex. So this is where the law is kind of departing from what we're talking about as a more modern understanding of gender and sex. And so Gorsuch is really actually doing the LGBTQ plus community. He's helping by taking this law, which is old, from 1964, and and applying it to the current, to a more current understanding of what's going on. Cool. broader current understanding. So in this case, Gerald Bostock, who's a gay man, began working for Clayton County, Georgia as a child welfare services coordinator in 2003. And so during his 10-year career, he had positive performance evaluations, numerous accolades. In 2013, Bostock began participating in a gay recreational softball league. He started getting criticism for participating in the gay softball league. He was criticized for his sexual orientation as an identity. And during a meeting in which his supervisor was present, one person made openly disparaging remarks about his participation in the gay softball league. And then they said they were going to be conducting an internal audit, and they terminated him for, quote, conduct unbecoming of its employees. Within a few months of his termination, he filed a charge of discrimination with the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission. And then he filed a lawsuit against the county alleging discrimination based on sexual orientation based on the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And his case was dismissed because they reasoned that the law did not protect sexual orientation, sexual preference. It protected sex. And so the question was, does the Civil Rights Act prohibit employment discrimination because of sex? Does that include sexual orientation? So the holding in the case, this is by Gorsuch, is joined by Kagan, Sotomayor, Breyer, Ginsburg, and Roberts, says that when an employer fires an employee just for being gay or transgender, that violates the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Civil Rights Act prohibits discrimination against any individual because of the race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. The court says that when an employer intentionally fires an employee based in part on sex, that's discrimination. And so discrimination on the basis of homosexuality or transgender status means that the employer is intentionally treating that employee different because of their sex. So that is discrimination, and that is illegal. I'm not even going to bother with what the dissenting opinion said in this case because it's just a waste of our time. But the point is that this law, this interpretation of the law from last year means that if you or anyone listening to this podcast or anyone you know is experiencing active discrimination at work based upon a transgender status, homosexuality, sexual preference, any kind of membership in LGBTQ plus community, or even the implication, that is workplace discrimination. That is protected by the law, and you have the right to a discrimination-free workplace. You have the right to be treated as you choose, to gender identify as you choose, and to be who you are in the workplace. It is against the law. That is my soapbox.
Yay.
Did you have questions about that?
No, I'm just thinking about different scenarios when I noticed that they did have to, like different workplaces I worked for, they did have to work a bit extra hard to gender me correctly or something. Like the first job I ever worked that wasn't family owned was Target, and I was trying out he him pronouns at the time when I was trying to figure out which gender I most related to, and they tried really hard to gender me correctly. So it's
that's
interesting.
good. Yeah, well, that's good. I think they were if it was before 2020, then they were maybe a little bit ahead of the curve.
It was.
Now we can actually force them to do it.
Yeah. So it's interesting to think that they weren't legally thinking about the legal ramifications if they didn't, because this was 2018 or a little bit before. So that's cool. San Francisco, well, you know.
Yeah, well, they may have been thinking about legal ramifications. I'm not sure that. I think the California law prohibited discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity before this decision, but this now makes it a national standard.
Wow.
Yeah. So what I want to do from here is I want to jump into the interview of you and ask you a few questions and put that in.
You use more of neutral language when you describe your spouse?
That's right.
Right. So I as a non-binary person, I use they them pronouns, and I always notice how language is gendered. And so when I noticed how in different like descriptions of yourself, you describe yourself as a human, as a spouse, I was like, oh wow, that's a gender neutral phrase. And they seem to be very heteronormative, but they're using gender neutral language, and you and your wife seem to be educating yourself as things change. I was really comforted to see all these things, because I never know how people who I meet in class, what they really believe, and if they're just being nice to me, but they could have internalized, I don't know, transphobia. What's the other one? Homophobia. I always forget about the homophobia phrase.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's such an interesting time, Em, because I think our culture is in the middle of a big shift. I certainly have learned a lot. I learned enough to know that there's a lot more I have to learn. So a year ago, I wasn't even really aware of, pronouns affecting people.
Yeah.
And had someone told me 10 years ago, I would have made a change, because I just didn't know. I didn't think of it. It wasn't something that was within my sphere, which is not an excuse, but it's
relatable though.
But it's not an excuse. It's just that I didn't have the experience.
Mhm.
or the awareness or the sensitivity to realize like things that I do without knowing or automatically could be hurting people without me being aware of it. And even though I'm not intending to hurt anyone, it's still having that effect.
Mhm.
And so I'm not someone who wants to hurt people. I want to, and I believe most people don't want to hurt people.
Mhm.
I do think that we get a lot in these days in the media of people barking about things,
Mhm.
and I think those loud voices don't represent where most people are at.
Totally.
So I appreciate that meant something to you, and I'm glad that it did.
And I noticed, so Transgender Day of Visibility just came around again, but I remember last year when I posted about it, you actually liked it and said nice words.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
glad that I did.
I bet you don't remember, but
No,
this is something I remember.
yeah, no, I do remember. I do remember saying something about that because at that point in time, I wasn't aware of your
Gender identity.
of your identity. Yeah.
Mhm.
And um, at Second City, it's not something that
They don't really ask. But lately, places like clown classes and different classes, they've been putting their pronouns next to their name or like
Mhm.
going around in the circle and saying them ahead of time so people aren't assuming things. But I
Yeah.
I actually didn't tell people all the time cuz I don't know. I wasn't campaigning for myself at the time or whatever the right word is.
So do you want to can you tell me a little bit about your journey?
Sure. Do you want to ask a question like what specific?
So okay, so just saying I wasn't campaigning for myself.
I
What does
wasn't
that
like
mean?
I don't know. I don't know what the right word is. Promoting you know when you're like supporting yourself against other people, uplifting. Let's see what's the right word. Well, I wasn't I wanted to keep everyone just comfortable and not just you know how some people feel like, oh, this person's like pushing their gender identity down my throat or all these. I didn't want to feel like a burden. And so now I do say my pronouns ahead of time. But like even at work, I didn't broadcast it and just continually correct people because I didn't want to burden anyone with it.
Uh-huh.
So now that the communities and society are becoming more like nice about the learning process and like learning pronouns, I feel more comfortable to be like, oh yeah, these are my pronouns, this is my gender identity, because
Mhm.
people are actually talking about it in positive ways now, just like how you guys are using spouse.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. And it's so new for me. But I'm sure it's not new for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's interesting use the word comfort, feeling comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've been thinking about that. And, as a, you know, apparently, you know, I guess the word is cisgendered, I believe.
Yes, it is.
Heterosexual white male,
Yeah.
Christian
Yeah.
professional with slightly gray hair and a professional title. I walk into a room and my discomfort shouldn't be like it. Like if you're accommodating my comfort level, then there's something not right because
Right.
I don't need to be my comfort level to be accommodated.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
doing violence on other people, basically.
Right.
And so where I'm at is trying to recognize that I have a role to play,
Mm-hmm.
and that my role is that I can model behavior
Mm-hmm.
that is might make other people who look like me realize that not everybody does,
Yeah.
and
And
that
some people who look like you could be non-binary as well.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah, totally true. And that's a great point.
Mm-hmm.
So I only wish I could do more.
Yeah, well, talking about it and being open to constructive advice is awesome. Like I've noticed how some people when they're corrected or they know that they said the wrong pronoun, this is something to avoid. They profusely apologize and they make it about themselves. Like, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry. Give me patience. Oh my god." And I'm like, "It's okay. Don't think that it's we all have learning processes. Like it takes me a long time to correctly gender someone as well, even though I use they them pronouns. But making it about making about yourself is a problem, and making the queer or gender nonconforming or gay person or whoever or minority person of color to comfort you is not ideal for anyone, you know?
Yeah,
So just
yeah.
being open to like, oh yes, they them. Yes, you're right. Thank you. Just saying thank you and like continuing your sentence. You know, like, oh, M wrong pronoun, blah 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 sentence. And then I'm like, oh, they and then you repeat this the sentence with the correct pronoun and it's just a practice skill, you know?
Oh,
And when
that's
in
you.
doubt, use their name.
Yeah. Um, that is a good piece of advice. When
Yeah.
in doubt, use a person's first name.
Yeah, like, oh, M loves ice cream. They love ice cream. Don't steal their ice cream. I can never think of the them one. You must kill them to steal their ice cream. I don't know. It's always snack related for me. Yeah.
That's cool. No, that's actually useful advice, and I appreciate that reminder about um, there can be a tendency to feel embarrassed. It's
Mhm.
embarrassment. It's like, oh fuck, I
Yeah.
screwed up. I did something that was like offensive, and like
Mhm.
I don't want to be offensive. And it's like,
Right.
okay, well, by
Yeah.
being so upset about it, it's making more of a thing.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So you asked me like what my story was.
Uh-huh.
Well, growing up, I never really felt comfortable being super feminine or being or having stereotypes projected onto me. Like girls do this, boys do this, you know. You have to have long hair. You have to look a certain way. These are the stereotypes you must conform to. And pink felt like the enemy. And I was the youngest of four and my older sibling is my brother. And so they didn't know they're having more girls, quote unquote, after him. So everyone got pink clothing for when I was born. Lots of pink. So I became Pinky. That was my nickname. And I was only in pink for so long.
Oh.
And so much was projected onto me. And I had a very hyper feminine first name. Like M is short for a hyper feminine first name. And so there's just so much that goes along with your name. Like Billy is short for William, right?
Uh-huh.
But
Yeah.
Billy really fits your personality. Like you're fun and spontaneous and exciting. And William sounds more like, oh, hello, I'm William. Respect me. I am hyper masculine. Give me the canoe. I will row us to safety.
Usually I use William when I want money from somebody.
Yes, I understand. Getting grants or something?
Yeah.
Or oh, hello, I am William.
When I want to make a reservation at a restaurant.
Oh, that's pretty good. When I order food, they're like, "Okay, what name is it under?" And I'm like, "M." And they're like, "Anne?" M-E-M. Okay, M-E-M. I'll put you down. I'm like, "Oh gosh. Why?"
Oh no.
No. So,
Oh wow.
yeah. There's
So
lots of struggles.
so you had an insufferable nickname, a first name that didn't fit you,
Mhm.
and a wardrobe that was repulsive.
And I've had chest surgery, so I'm
Mhm.
very flat, and I was flat when I met you. But growing up, I have a family line that has very large boobs, and so I'm 4'10". You remember how short I am, and I had size 34F boobs on my tiny little frame, and people assume so much when that is on you.
Uh-huh.
You know,
Yeah.
so there's just so much assumptions and projections onto people. Like anyone, you said that before people would accuse you or assume that you're gay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that might happen because people have these stereotypes of what masculinity looks like. And if you're not hiding or masking your feelings and your enthusiasm and just like your like happy smiley self, then you're not masculine and you must be something else, when you don't have to be anything specific or use specific labels or any of this to be just a person, a human, like you like to be called
Mm-hmm.
in your profile. Um, so I don't know. People just want stereotypes in the United States, and that's what they want to see. And if they don't see it, they'll shun you or be mean to you, or me.
Mm-hmm.
They've
Mm-hmm.
been mean to me.
I know.
You
I'm
know?
sure. I know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. No, I did hear um Nicole shared with me, and then also I listened to the podcast just about some of the bullying that you experienced, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry. That is just horrible.
Thanks. Yeah, bullying is not cool. And I was going to school when cyberbullying was new.
Oh.
And so my school didn't want to deal with it, and the police didn't want to deal with it as a serious thing. So nothing was really worked out. And my teacher, who was the master of the bullies in high school, she still works there. And I actually
Wow.
live just down the street from the high school. So it's kind of like triggering when they have their like marching band music playing, and I can hear
Oh
it.
my God.
Yeah, hear it at my house. And she drives past my house to get home. I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, life's hard. And that's all before gender happens and gender identity happens.
So
Bullying.
when did you kind of start becoming aware that your birth sex wasn't matching your gender? Like, was that something you
Mm.
knew immediately, or was that something that kind of developed over time? What was that like for you?
Well, I never felt comfortable about like the boob thing or like stereotypes. And in high school, I tried cutting my hair and then I got it fixed the next morning, so it looked like this, but even shorter. And that was in high school. And my town, Simi Valley, was not very kind to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like people weren't nice to me anymore. When you're a little kid and you're like a cute little kid, and usually people are nice to you for just that reason. But then people stopped being nice to me, so I realized, okay, I'm gonna grow my hair back and blend in. And once I went to college, San Francisco State University, um, I got to experiment with how I presented myself again. So I cut my
Mm-hmm.
hair again, and I got a gender therapist, which
Uh-huh.
helped me get top surgery, or at least get on the list for top surgery. And college was kind of very like depressing and kind of sad in like just figuring out my gender identity and working through depression and all those things, as well as trying to get good grades. So that was
Yeah.
hard.
Oh, I know. Gosh. Yeah. Um, wow, that sounds intense. So was that something like, did that start as soon as you were kind of out of Simi Valley and at San Francisco State? Or
Well, I've had two chest surgeries. So I've had a breast reduction first, and that's when I first started to feel more like myself, once I no longer had as much weight on my chest. So I could
uh-huh.
start wearing clothing that was more comfortable
Uh-huh.
and explore.
Uh-huh.
So just getting some distance from the town and discovering who I wanted to be, and being so depressed that I can't live like this anymore. So I have to change. And then I have to tell my parents and see if they'll still support me,
Mm-hmm.
So it's all a struggle. And that's why it's important to have people like lawyers and people who help defend different amendments or cases. And we could even talk about some of those cases. Like, I remember when
Sure.
Proposition 8 happened and I was in middle school, and I remember seeing signs for yes or no on people's lawns. And I was thinking, wait a second, these people are voting this way, but they do have a gay son, so which one is the correct one? It's so confusing how they word like propositions, and I think that one was especially confusing.
Yeah, it was. It was intentionally confusing.
Yeah,
And many propositions are intentionally confusing.
yeah.
Um, so,
And then another case you brought up
mhm.
was Obergefell, right?
Obergefell. Yeah,
Yeah,
Obergefell.
versus Hodges. Is that the one from 2015?
Yeah. So,
Right.
yeah. So um, so the marriage equality movement has occurred since in the period of time since I became a lawyer. It was, um, I remember in law school in 2003, um, my constitutional law professor talked about marriage equality as an issue that was potentially coming up. So yeah, so one of the things, you know, in our exchanges before the show is I was like, are there legal issues you're interested in? And you said, yeah, what about marriage? And so good news, the law today is that in the United States of America, any adult can marry any other adult.
Yay. I
Which
like that it's less specific about marrying men, men wearing men marrying women, women marrying women. Because I don't identify either way,
right.
and so it's like, do I have any rights that these people have gotten beforehand before they start using gender neutral terms or labels?
I think what it really comes down to um, is that it's really about love. And you know, if you ask someone, do you love other human beings?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is almost universally yes.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to do you want to live in a society that is loving and inclusive to other human beings? The answer is universally yes. We all believe that. People believe that. I think almost everybody. Of course, there's going to be people who are ill, but almost everybody believes that. And so if we start from that common ground of love, I feel like people can learn, and I hope that people learn. And so what I see now, I see the stress, and my heart goes out to transgender persons to be so focused on, marginalized, and really being used um, as a political
Tool?
a political tool to try and wedge people and drive people apart.
Yes.
Um,
Or to promote people's support. Like, I remember last year when Trump had the transgender ban on the military, transgender people ban,
mhm.
and that the day that that happened was a really bad day for me. I was just thinking, wow, the United States is against people like me, and this is just a reflection of more horrible laws to come. And it actually affects people that are transgender, that are already in the military, that are already serving, or that want to apply. I've heard people were turned away when they were applying around that time because the recruiter was like, maybe wait till later because right now you don't want to get totally banned from joining the military in general because of this that's happening right now.
Wow.
Yeah. So it all of these things do affect people thoroughly. So it's awesome that we could even talk about all of these different propositions or um, lawsuits that happen or unconstitutional things or whatever.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think too, you have different shifts. You have the law and you have culture. Sometimes the law is
Mm-hmm.
ahead of culture and sometimes it's behind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think in the case of marriage equality, I think the law was a little bit ahead of the culture. And I think that the law impacted the culture in that instance. I think
Yeah.
recognizing
Or maybe
and
mainstream culture,
makes
because the
yeah.
queer people have always been like, this is what we need, this is what we want. Oh my gosh, finally. And then mainstream culture has to come up, and for people who may not hear about queer issues before can hear about it now.
Yeah, and actually that's a great correction. I really appreciate that. Um I think the word using the word culture to describe mainstream culture is not inclusive, because there are
Mm-hmm.
many cultures within our
Yeah.
nation, and I think that's a really great point.
Yeah.
um and I even think the word mainstream might not be the right word.
I think about mainstream culture as the one that Hollywood is projecting that this is what society is to the world and to the United States.
Well, it's so interesting that you talk about Hollywood, because I think these different things that are related here, where um you know with social media and with everyone having a basically a movie studio in their pocket at all times,
Mm-hmm.
um the ability to create short form comedy drama, um you know
Podcasts, TikTok.
documentaries. Yeah, TikTok is short form documentary.
My gosh.
And
15 to 60 seconds. My God.
yeah, and you have a degree in film studies
Mm-hmm.
and cinema, and you think about, I mean, I made a film in 1997,
Mm-hmm.
okay, as my senior thesis, and I sat in a basement with videotape, giant VHS tapes, and matching them up to make one cut. It would take me, like, for every single edit would take me like 10 minutes to do one edit. um and I had notebooks of all the things that I was it was and the I think about, like, wow, people are walking around with movie studios today, and what that's done is it has broken up the monopoly on a cultural dialogue. And part of what we're seeing is the people who don't want that to happen, you know people who may have benefited from a white male patriarchal society,
Yes. Where
and
they're controlling what's being put out there, who's being hired, and all these monopolies that they've been using to control what people are consuming.
Mhm. Well, and also the consumers
Yeah.
who are used to seeing themselves on screen, and then all of a sudden they're seeing people who don't look like them on screen,
Yes.
and wondering, am I still important?
Yes.
And unfortunately, there's a book I really want to read called oh crap, it's by Ijeoma Oluo, called Mediocre. It's about the sort of toxic impact of white male mediocrity.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. um, and this idea that just because of your identity, you're entitled to be a dominant force in society, and some people are threatened by that. And
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, I'm in ways that I can't really say on a podcast. I am experiencing it every day, in the sense that I don't want to be um, I want to be part of a society where um, M. Persico is every bit as human as Billy DeClercq.
Yeah,
And that
and
doesn't,
represented in the media as such and not just as a stereotype.
and I don't want laws to be enacted that make you feel excluded.
Right. And even just representation in the media is so big for everyone who doesn't just look like you. Like in college, when I was deciding to transition to the extent of making me comfortable, like I've had chest surgery and I cut my hair and I started to present more masculine, to see how masculine or feminine or neither I would prefer to feel like, and not think that this is how I have to look. Now I'm allowing myself to for some freedom. Well, during college when I was deciding whether or not I should get rid of the boobs and things, I was thinking, man, I'll never be able to act if I do this, like be an actor, because there's no one in the media that looks like me. And I won't be able to play the female roles because I don't have boobs, and I won't be able to play the male roles because I'm not taking hormones, and I'm not taller than 5 feet. I'm 4'10". And so this was something I was struggling with while I was trying to get comfortable in my body in college in a cinema major.
Right.
I even have a story, like I was taking a lot of writing classes, screenwriting courses, world building courses, and I have been writing this fantasy world where the main character is non-binary, like me. It could be played by anyone, but hopefully a non-binary actor or a transgender actor. And so one of the comments that my professor said in class was, there needs to be a story reason why the main character is non-binary, which made me kind of sad to think. So there needs to be a story reason why I exist in a film or fantasy film or any story ever.
And a story reason for a non-cinema major would be what?
No, not
Like,
a
what would you?
non-binary person.
No,
So,
I know, but
what do
like
you mean?
I mean, can you define what a story reason would be?
Like, oh, they're going to show diversity in the movie by connecting two sides of a society by being non-binary. Just think about it like, oh, there has to be a story reason why the main character is a woman other than a white heteronormative man. Oh, she is uniting the feminists with the rebel group because this is what's related to being a woman.
So the story, so when someone says a story reason, like the character, like there has to be a story reason that something happens in a film,
Right.
like an explanation, and you basically reaction to that is like, how about just they're a person?
Yeah. Why can't me, a non-binary person, exist in a story without my gender being a part of the storyline?
Right.
Right. So, like, I tell this concept to queer people, and they usually get it pretty like, oh, that's so lame. And then I tell it to screenwriters, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, I get it. And so there's always different responses to this concept.
Well, for me, it's like a non-cinema person. It's like,
What does the story reason mean?
What's the story reason? Yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
I kind of knew, but I wanted to make sure I understood that.
Right. I want to build a world for my character where their gender or gender non-conforming like identity and projection of themselves in society doesn't have to be what our society is doing and how they treat people.
Mm-hmm.
Like it can have female leaders that are in power, and it doesn't have to be, oh, this is how she got to the top because of all the oppression of these certain people. Like I want to build a completely different world where it does seem more like less patriarchal and not
Mm-hmm.
like oppressing certain groups or underrepresenting people or being mean to people just because they're different.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want that to be a thing. And
Mm-hmm.
perhaps that erases identities and erases struggles, but I also want to show a world where you don't have to oppress people or bully them for their gender identity. And I also want to be able to play this role as myself, looking like I look without boobs and have scars on my chest and actually be in fantasy films and get to a sword fight or whatever. I
Yeah.
just want to exist,
Yeah.
And that's what representation in the media means to me.
Uh-huh.
And that's why I try to consume more things that have that, like Sabrina, the Adventures of Sabrina the Teenage Witch. They had a new Netflix version of that story,
Uh-huh.
and one of the characters in it is a transgender person, and it's played by a non-binary actor.
Uh-huh.
Right. I don't
Oh,
know. I don't know if you know this, but they're the pink, blue, white, pink, blue. I don't know the order, but that's the colors in the transgender flag, and the white one
yeah.
is non-binary.
Oh.
So we are part of the umbrella. So the actor
Oh.
is a non-binary actor.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And
cool.
that's the first time I ever saw someone who looked like me
Uh-huh.
on the screen, and that was only a few years ago.
That's well, I'm glad for that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. I know. It's just um
Yeah. So it's just like being aware of what we're consuming in the media, or like what content we're creating. And so in your podcast, I'm looking at the description of it, and it says after you do the original scenes, Billy throws off his gloves and goes for the jugular by asking heavyweight questions to find out what makes his guests tick.
yeah.
What is, what is what is that? What does that
That
entail?
well, what I usually do is, the conversation that we've been having is
Yeah.
usually kind of at the end, and I'll ask questions um, like medium difficult questions, like if there was a childhood moment that you could go back to and reenact, what would it be and why?
Damn. You want me to try to answer it?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. This one time, the very only time I ever was put on timeout was because I locked my friend Lindsay out of the house and I put caution tape all over the doors. And she cried. She cried about it. And then I got put on timeout in this very room in this corner. And maybe I would not have done that. Or maybe if I reenacted it, I don't know. How do you make people know it's a joke?
I
I think
don't
that's the
know.
last time I tried doing a joke on someone.
Well, I mean, did she stay your friend?
Yeah,
Okay.
till
Well, I guess.
after elementary school, till elementary school, and then I went to middle school without her, and then she came the next year. So I guess not.
Mm. Well, I don't know. I mean, maybe let's see. Maybe if you had jumped out through the caution tape and yelled surprise, then she would have like
Mm.
known that the joke.
Maybe if I didn't lock the door.
Yeah. My neuroscientist spouse is very clear on one thing, which is that social isolation activates the pain centers in the brain. And so
Ooh.
you actually experience social isolation and exclusion as physical pain.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that I have learned from her.
I can definitely relate to that feeling because during college, I spent a lot of time by myself. And after college, I was home and I was still very depressed. And so the only things I would do was go to work and come home. And so the only people I ever talked to were Starbucks baristas and waitresses, my parents, and a few people at work. So I was basically in isolation or quarantine before quarantine was a thing in 2018. So I
Oh,
can
wow.
I can relate to it being physically painful.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
terrible. I'm smiling about it now just because I don't know. I'm at such a different place now, being able to talk to my friends on Zoom about podcast stuff and meeting them in person at in musical improv classes and meeting their spouse over Zoom and talking about her wonderful book. So it's nice not to be in pain anymore.
Yeah. So tell me about your clowning.
Oh.
How did you get started? Do you have a style as a clown?
Mm. I think I'm still learning my style as a clown because I'm still learning myself. I'm
Mhm.
still discovering myself and becoming more comfortable as a performer and as a person with social anxiety. I'm getting more comfortable in the room as a performer, but also as a person.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you could tell in our class, but I might have been awkward, fidgety, nervous seeming at times, but maybe not because I had taken a few classes up until then, which helped me become more comfortable around people. But what were we talking about?
Your clown persona.
Clown persona. Oh, yeah. So at times, being a non binary person, I tend to wear cool clothing like earrings, dark clothing, ripped jeans, etc. So there's a real like cool kid persona that non-binary people or queer people try to show. Like not right now because I'm wearing tie dye, but sometimes I try to look cool. And so a style that I tend to go into for clowning is a more whimsical person who is more childlike and not trying to be cool, not trying to avoid embarrassment, just like going with it. And clowning is that in general. Clowning is, for me, doing anything that scares me or makes me feel embarrassed. So if I am embarrassed by my butt, maybe I'll do a butt dance and then it's no longer an embarrassing feeling for me. And so I move out of my comfort zone and making it bigger. That's a term I just learned, making my comfort zone bigger.
Mm-hmm.
Avner the eccentric just taught me that in class recently.
What was the name again?
Avner the eccentric.
Oh,
He's a red-nosed clown and he's amazing. Also
what's
known Avner Eisenberg.
oh,
You should look him up. I'm in one of
okay.
his classes and I'm gonna take his class again in a few months when it starts up again.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so clowning is all about breaking the fourth wall, making eye contact with the audience, trying so hard to be successful at something, and then failing at it and sharing it with the audience.
Uh-huh.
So that's what clowning is to me. So,
I
and
like
just being a
that.
more whimsical, free person.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I've been really trying to do with my gender identity, with my life, with performances and clowning. Is to become more free and comfortable and be able to jump on stage more eventually with musical improv or whatever I'm doing. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's tough.
Yeah.
It's tough to be a person.
It is. But I think it's amazing that you're doing a podcast and uh you know, I was really honored that you reached out to me. Um
You
I
were
think
one of the first people I reached out to, actually.
well, I was like, wow, she's like planned podcasts 3 months in advance.
I'm now planned 7 months in advance.
I mean, you're a pro.
Yay!
That's that's seriously amazing. I was like, wow, I was like, you're like, would you like to be on? I'm like, sure. You're like, how's April? I'm like, that's like 100 years from now. Like, I'm like usually like I was writing my outline 10 minutes before we got on. So
Yeah.
so I admire the organization.
Yay!
Um,
You should see my calendar.
oh,
I know.
cool.
Uh huh.
Very cool.
It's crazy. And I
Or,
start my
or
calendar with on Monday because I like to group my Friday, Saturday, and Sundays together because clown classes, you got to group your classes together.
oh,
I don't know. It works for me.
oh, that sounds cool.
Yeah. So, what projects are you working on?
Oh, can I before I answer that, can I say something
Sure.
about social anxiety?
Yes.
Okay, so when we met in the musical improv class, I could tell you were really cool, and I could tell that the improv made you nervous. And I would say, as a person who tends to be more boisterous, um, and also someone who doesn't want to be a jerk, um, I would say to you, if there had been an opportunity at the time to have a conversation, I would say, be you. We're glad you're here.
Yay.
And just like, I think understanding like if you're feeling that anxiety, we all feel it to some extent or another. And just to know and believe that for the most part, 99.9999999% of people want you to be there and want to know you and want to experience what you have to share.
And they want you to be successful. They
That's
want
right.
you to do well because they feel better when the person does well.
Yeah, and I think we can do a better job in improv classes. Musical improv is interesting because it kind of, because it was an all-comers kind of class, and with the conservatory, you're with a group and you kind of grow together.
Right.
So I had already taken like a bunch of improv classes in a
That's
row
very
at that point.
helpful. I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
Before I do musical improv again.
It's definitely, because musical improv is neat because it is a magic trick, because as improv goes, it's not as complicated as doing like a straight organic scene for an hour or whatever, but it's also got its own thing going on. But it's also really fun.
Yeah.
But anyway, from rolling back the clock anyway, I'd say, I would have said, had there been a moment, I would have said, I'm really glad you're here, Em, and I'm glad to meet you. And I'm glad you're part of this class. And if I steamroll you, just tell me to sit down. It's your turn.
That's crazy. Actually, at the beginning of those type of classes, they gathered us all in a room, and then we did like a warm-up exercise before everyone split off. Do you remember the first day?
Yeah, sort of cloudy.
Yeah. Well, I actually noticed you before we all got split off into the appropriate rooms, and I was thinking, wow, this person is very enthusiastic, has lots of buddies to be chatting with, and I was like, oh, that's someone I would like to like emulate, to be so charismatic and comfortable.
You're great just the way you are.
But I think I have worked on that, and now I can be just as charismatic as you and more comfortable with new groups of people. And maybe I've just collected everyone and be like, hey, we're buddies now. So just more comfortable in a room.
The other thing too is I think it helps doing improv the better your other performers, because their tricks and their go-tos, and you kind of know their style and you can read each other better. And
I have no perception. I never guess well, but I think I'm not grounded enough and present in the room to get on the same page as some people. So I think that would help me a lot.
Well, I think maybe it's just, getting in there and doing it and learning. And I think the other thing is I love the idea of just getting comfortable with failure. And that the failure is the fun part.
Yeah.
Like if you're doing an improv scene that, just falls apart, it doesn't really matter.
Right. You know what? It reminds me of my favorite quote. I have the magnet in this very room on the air vent in my room, and it's been there since I bought it like a decade ago. And it's success is going from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm. Winston Churchill.
I like it.
Yeah, and that's exactly what clowning is. And it's something that I've been grasping onto it, even though sometimes I feel like, oh man, I'm so bad at this, I've lost my enthusiasm. But eventually I get it back. And I keep going to each thing and trying so hard, And so I guess it's not really failure. I'm just successfully going to each thing and like trying really hard and being successful or whatever. I don't know.
I mean, look, who's the hero of the Peanuts cartoons?
The yellow bird or the dog? No, Charlie Brown?
Charlie Brown.
And he's the one who always like messes up. Like he tries to kick the ball and he misses and he lands on his back.
Right. Lucy always pulls the football away, and Charlie Brown always tries to kick it.
Oh, it's so sad.
It is so sad, but
we root for him.
We love Charlie Brown because we're all like that. We all know what it feels like. Nobody roots for Lucy.
Oh, it's true.
But
Sad.
even Lucy has her moments too. But I think
Yeah.
that point about like we love the person who is trying, because we all know what that feels like.
Yeah.
So,
So the last question I ask, are you ready?
uh-huh.
What is your favorite dessert?
I should have prepared for this because I knew it was coming.
Oh no, I'm glad you didn't.
But I did actually.
Oh
Now I
no.
remember because I listened, and I was surprised to hear my spouse say ice cream, peppermint,
Yes.
and bubblegum. She was in
They're
a very
weird ones.
it was a very pink mood. But I will attest to that. Although she didn't mention honeycomb.
Is
She loves honey.
peppermint pink?
Peppermint, often.
Like a
Not,
candy cane?
yeah, a lot of times peppermint ice
Oh
cream is
my
pink.
goodness. I did not realize this until now.
Yeah. And so
Who
I was
knew?
planning out my answer. I was like, I'll say chocolate and more chocolate and a chocolate thing and a chocolate.
Oh
But
no.
I like chocolate.
Me too.
Yeah.
Chocolate cake or a specific type of chocolate bar or milk chocolate, dark chocolate, chocolate
Mm,
covered cocoa beans, coffee beans.
those all sound great.
So any chocolate.
Any chocolate.
My gosh. Chocolate ice cream?
Chocolate ice cream. I like to get chocolate ice cream with chocolate fudge on top. And then sometimes
Yes.
what I really like is putting rainbow sprinkles on things.
Me too. The crunch.
The crunch, and also it's
Texture.
just like you look at it and you're like, how can you not be happy looking at rainbow
It's so
sprinkles?
happy and joyful. I agree. I also do that. I heat up a brownie or a cookie. I put some ice cream on it. I put rainbow sprinkles on it, and it's like go time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The rainbow sprinkles are where it's at.
Oh my gosh. That sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I also get, when I go to Baskin Robbins, I go towards the sundae concept, but I do get the dark chocolate ice cream with hot fudge and whipped cream.
Oh yeah.
And it
That
almost
sounds
tastes
good.
like dirt, but almost, but not exactly. So it's like, yes, perfect, on the money. Not too much dirt flavor.
I want to thank my guest, M. Persico. Listen to M's show, Artist with M, everywhere you get your podcasts. Follow M on Instagram at M Persico. And finally, a public service announcement. If you or someone you know is experiencing stress or trauma relating to LGBTQ plus issues, I want to direct you to check out the Trevor Project. That's www.thetrevorproject.org. Telephone number 1-866-488-7386. Young people who are LGBTQ plus contemplate suicide at almost 3 times the rate of heterosexual youth. They are almost 5 times as likely to have attempted suicide compared to heterosexual youth. And of suicide attempts made by youth, LGBTQ plus youth suicide attempts were almost 5 times as likely to require medical treatment than those of heterosexual youth. They're 4 to 6 more times likely to result in injury due to poisoning or overdose that requires treatment from a doctor or nurse as compared to straight peers. And 40% of transgender adults report having made a suicide attempt. 92% of those individuals report having attempted suicide before the age of 25. LGBTQ plus youth who come from highly rejecting families are 8.4 times as likely to have attempted suicide as LGBTQ plus peers who've reported low or no levels of family rejection. Each episode of LGBTQ victimization, such as physical or verbal harassment or abuse, increases the likelihood of self-harming behavior by 2.5 times on average. This is a health emergency. If you or someone you know is suffering from bullying or abuse relating to their gender identity or sexual orientation, please go to thetrevorproject.org, 1-866-488-7386, 1-866-488-7386. You're not alone. There is help. You're not alone. Laying Down the Law is a product of Beyond Unreasonable Doubt, produced by Jeffrey Feitner and Verboten Productions. Our music is Galactic Damages by Jingle Punk. Our cover art is courtesy of The Mighty Q. I want to thank all of our listeners, and if you're enjoying the show, please tell a friend, subscribe, share, write a review, leave us a rating. It helps us reach more ears. The single best way, though, is to recommend this podcast to someone else. If you're not enjoying the show, I'm not sure why you're listening, but okay. And please always feel free to tweet at me at MaxHeadroomESQ with any questions, comments, or suggestions. I'm your host, Billy DeClercq, aka Max Headroom Esquire, and I am a warrior without a weapon.